A very warm welcome to King's College, Cambridge, and to our Entrepreneurship Lab, also known as King's eLab. Hi, I'm Francesca Hodgson, visiting entrepreneur to King's eLab, and it's a privilege and pleasure to be in conversation with Bobby Yerramilli-Rao, Chief Strategy Officer for Microsoft. A very warm welcome to you, Bobby.
Hi, nice to be here, Francesca.
Our mission here at King's eLab is to equip all students from all backgrounds, both here at King's and beyond, with entrepreneurial skills and empower them with the opportunity and access to an incredible network. And to our audience, because you are here and because you are listening, you too are part of our network. So welcome. We'll have about 35-minute discussion today before we open up for Q&A. And as we speak, please do use the chat function to ask any questions, as we will come to your questions later. In the background, we're joined by our fabulous eLab team, Camilla, Sophie, and Mia, and they'll be supporting our questions, ensuring that we get through as many as possible. We're excited to be speaking with Bobby on artificial intelligence and how it's reshaping industry and redefining competitive advantage. Bobby, again, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And behind all great achievements are individuals who have been on a journey and who have stories to share. So I'd love to start by asking you to introduce yourself and to give yourself an opportunity to share your story that led you to becoming the Chief Strategy Officer for Microsoft.
Thanks, Francesca. So I really don't like talking about myself a lot, so I'll do my best to explain what led me to this position here today. As you all may know, I was a Cambridge alum at Downing College, the best college actually that obviously Francesca was at as well. And I think I really don't need to say any more about how great Downing is, but it's clearly for all of you who are not from Downing, I feel sorry for you. That's all I can say. So I started there as an undergrad doing engineering. Before I did that, I actually had worked as an engineer at Marconi Research, and I'd always just wanted to be an engineer. Even in high school, I was programming computers and selling software from my bedroom. And so I just had no other intention in my life other than being an engineer. So after my undergrad, through a very happy coincidence, which is a theme I think that you'll hear in the next couple of minutes as I go through what led me to what I'm doing now. One of my tutors found out that I was interested in doing a PhD and said, well, you should speak to my friend, Hugh, who's at Oxford, and he's at the robotics lab there, and I was interested in robotics. So I met Hugh, and Hugh said, well, the interview was basically a chat, and he said, well, why don't you apply? And then I ended up getting him to do a DPhil at Oxford, which was great. And while I was there, I thought it would be really important to go to America, to Silicon Valley in particular, which is where I thought I would love to live. I felt that the combination of academic work plus the entrepreneurial spirit of Silicon Valley would really suit me. No obvious way to get there as someone with a British passport. But again, happy coincidence, there was a lecturer who was visiting for 3 months who from a British guy from Oxford who was a professor at Berkeley. And as one does, we all went for beers one day. And he said, well, why didn't you apply? And so I applied and I got in to do a postdoc at Berkeley. And I went there and was there for 3 very happy years. But I realized very quickly that I was not going to be a professor. That was not really where my calling would be. And again, another happy coincidence, I was presenting a paper at a conference, and an old friend of mine from Oxford, who I think has previously spoken at this event, James Vanica, said, why don't you, I'm going to go and work at McKinsey, why don't you apply? And I didn't even know what McKinsey was or what it did, but I applied and I got a job. And so I ended up working there. I thought I'd be there for 2 years before they found out that I was useless. And ended up staying for 10 years. And then they found out that I was useless, or I decided actually I didn't want to be there anymore. And so I left because I got another happy coincidence occurred, which is that someone that I knew became the CEO of a big company in the UK called Vodafone. And he said, well, I'd like you to join me. And so I joined there and went and worked there for 4 very happy years, until I then bumped into someone who said, well, we should start a venture fund together. And so I did that. And that, again, was a happy coincidence. It led me to run a venture fund for 10 years in the UK and in the West Coast, investing in what in those days was a novel concept, which is software as a service. At the same time, I ended up founding 2 companies because my best friend from Cambridge became a professor in biochemistry and one of the leading biochemists of our generation. And he wanted to start a couple of companies and thought it'd be helpful to have someone with more of a business background. So I helped him to do that, and we got those two companies still running. We raised money from all the big venture funds. It's been fascinating to be both an investor and a founder at the same time. Sometimes I was actually even pitching to funds where I was sitting on the board with them in companies that we'd invested in, which is kind of an unusual thing. And I can tell you, they didn't give me any less of a hard time just because they knew me. It was a grilling nonetheless, which was quite interesting. And then one day, a friend of mine approached and said, "Look, Microsoft, the CEO of Microsoft is looking for someone to join and run strategy. Would you consider that?" And so I said, "Well, I don't think they'd take me, but I'll have a go and meet him anyway." And one thing led to the other 6 or 7 years ago, and I've been here ever since. So all of my career has been really a series of very happy coincidences where people have said, "Why don't you try this?" And really, the thing that I've done is to, largely speaking, just say yes. And it's worked out. And if I hadn't said yes, and I would have regretted it. But if you say yes and they don't want you, then it's okay. But at least you had a go. So that's kind of how I've ended up here, not by design by any means.
It's wonderful. You're very modest, Bobby. But indeed, there's a powerful message there in taking the opportunities that surround you and also, putting yourself in places where you can actually access those opportunities and finding the right people that are going to help you carve and shape your future. I think today it's not that traditional ladder, in life and in business. And so the journey is really what you make it. And I think that's really a helpful kind of context and positioning for sort of entrepreneurs and people at the early stage of their careers, in terms of potentially how do you go and navigate this big, wide, crazy world that's out there. And so there's a powerful message there in just saying yes. And I wonder, actually, because our audience, there's a lot of young students, if you were talking to them today, what sort of career paths, career advice might you give them?
I think the most important thing is there is no such thing as a career path. And I think that that is increasingly becoming an outmoded concept, actually. And I think the Steve Jobs speech, which I'm sure many of you heard, where he gave the commencement speech, I don't even know, 20 years ago at Stanford, where he talks about your life and your career makes sense when you look at it in reverse, but it doesn't make sense when you look at it going forward because you just never know which pieces are going to be put together at which time. It's not logical. You do then A, then B, then C, then D, and then you finally come to E. Sometimes you'll do A, and then you go to C, and you go back to B again, and you might take a little detour and do, N, and then come back. And so that is what ultimately happened to me, which is the experience that I've had. I bring every part of that experience to my job here every day, whether it's working in a big company or having started a small company or being an investor, having lived in the UK, having worked on both sides of the US, work I've done in Asia, the work that I've done outside of tech. Even I bring all of that every day to this role, but I didn't know that I was going to put all these pieces together to be able to do this role. So, and who knows what I'll end up doing after this even. But the point is that everything that you put together ultimately accrues. You may just not put it in the right order, or what you think is the right order. And the order is really what people think of as a career path. And I think that if you let go of the fact that there's an order, there will be a career aggregation of experiences that I think will be valuable.
That's really helpful. And now I kind of want to draw on some of your more recent work and sort of dive into the role of artificial intelligence, as we see it today. And you recently co-authored a article for Harvard Business Review with a highly compelling title, Strategy in an Era of Abundant Expertise. I absolutely love this title. And for our listeners here, do you want to dive a little bit more into that article and tell us more?
Yeah. I will. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to describe what my role is here and why I
Mm.
ended up doing that, because it's a little unusual for someone in a role in a company to be writing a Harvard Business Review paper in the first place. So the role at Microsoft obviously we're a very big company, and the we're fortunate in the sense that we have the resource and the ability to pretty much go in any direction that we feel like we would like to go. So the role that I have is one of deciding or helping to decide which directions we should go in. So the existing businesses we're in, what are the priority for them? And outside of the businesses we're in, what we should be doing? And a lot of that relies on having the ability to see a little bit ahead, gathering a bunch of signal from a range of people within the company and outside the company to see where technology and and economics can intersect. To grow a company of the size of Microsoft in a meaningful way, we really have to think about how large sections of GDP will ultimately be converted into something that's more technically augmented. So we're really looking for that type of scale of opportunity. And in that realm, AI plays a very important role because as AI became viable, really only 3, 4 years ago, it was possible to think of large portions of the world's GDP now becoming augmented by technology, in this case, these new generative AI models. And in thinking all of that through, what became apparent is that we're largely speaking an enterprise company. We sell to every company in the world. We obviously have a big consumer business as well, but in comparison to our enterprise business, it's smaller. So it's important for us to think about what it means for our customers as well, because we cannot survive if our customers are not doing well, and we only do well if the world is doing well. So in looking through what actually it meant for our customers, what became apparent is that there are very many beneficial aspects of AI for companies in terms of acceleration, improvement of quality, some degree of cost deflection, the ability to augment, etc. But it is also the case that as the models become more and more capable, they're going to have an impact on expertise. And that's really important because every general purpose technology in the world that has been invented, whether it's electricity or whether it's the combustion engine or it's the telephone, they've basically been innovations that have reduced the cost of an input factor that companies use to make their products. And when the cost of the input factor comes down, productivity goes up. Cost of the product comes down, demand goes up because of elasticity, and you end up with growth. And that's been the history of the world for since the printing press, essentially. Every general purpose technology has built on every other prior general purpose technology to reduce an input factor and increase business output. But the input factor that's being reduced in cost by AI is expertise. And expertise is an important input factor to think about because it's the thing that ultimately companies make their money from. The fact that actually you can fly from one country to the next was helpful for companies, but other than companies in the airline industry, it wasn't their business. It was an input factor. But expertise is typically the business of every business. Every business makes money because customers pay them for some unique bundle of expertise that they're able to put together at scale and deliver in a reliable way. But when that expertise itself is being impacted by AI, the core question is, well, what is my business now? Because my customer, not Microsoft customers, our customers' customers can come straight to the AI company potentially and say, well, I'll get that expertise from the AI. Now, that is not a world that we want. That's not a world that we think is helpful because then there's a giant sucking sound of value going to a few players in the world. I don't think anyone would find that a particularly attractive proposition. So we wanted to point that out as being something that companies should think about, which is why we ended up writing this paper and putting it out there, because it's an important concept for every business leader to understand. I need to not only leverage AI, but I need to understand how I'm going to use it to augment the core thing in my business. And our view is that actually the way that that should be done is that every company has its core expertise and its core data and its core experience. And all of that should be accrued into models which are specialized for a company. So the company can actually augment its expertise in the era of AI rather than finding itself being supplanted.
Really valuable. And so, where's the opportunity in your mind? Where should entrepreneurs really be looking to focus their energy?
It's the question that I get asked a lot. And the answer I always give is the same, which is find things which are durable in the era of AI. Find problems that are durable in the era of AI. There are problems which are uh, transient, and they don't appear to be transient. But this is where real thinking has to be applied by entrepreneurs, which is there are certain things which are going to be done better by AI than were done before. Maybe not a great idea to be starting businesses in those areas because that is going to be changed. There are certain areas where they're not going, no matter how good the AI gets, those aspects of a business will not be subsumed into AI. So, for example, the classic one is network effects. If you've got a business which is based on network effects, no matter how good the AI is, it's not going to be able to replicate the network, marketplace or social network. These things ultimately are based on connectivity and scale. That doesn't matter how good the AI is, it's not going to create that. So those sorts of businesses, there are factors which are going to remain immune to the advance of AI. So that's one set of durable kind of moats that people can think about building businesses on. The other area of moats which are interesting is to say, assuming that the AI is going to be able to be better at X, how can I leverage that to create a business opportunity which previously would have been unattainable because it's too slow or too expensive to start up? And so there's a lot of skill involved in this because the world is moving very quickly. I see very promising businesses that are even as soon as 18 months ago looked fantastic and were getting enormous adoption from developers or customers or whoever it is. And now, 18 months later, they're actually no longer necessary because the model has moved on or because there's something else. So it's tough to be an entrepreneur these days because picking those areas and knowing what is durable is hard, but that is the key.
That makes sense. And so, really, what should entrepreneurs focus on? Is it things like that extensive value that you can deliver to your customer and just being relentlessly good at what you do? How do you see the world evolving?
I think those sorts of things have always been the case and they'll continue to be the case. I don't think anyone's going to be able to succeed as an entrepreneur in any era if they don't have that relentlessness, the ability just to kind of not take no for an answer and have the messianic zeal to be able to get other people to follow you. Those are all kind of I think prerequisites for being an entrepreneur. In this particular era, what is more difficult is that problems which previously were hard and where if you could solve them, a customer would pay you for it. Many of those problems are now the ground on which those are being built. Those problems are is shifting very rapidly because AI is changing the landscape very quickly in terms of the economics of offering either solutions to that problem or adjacencies to that problem, or actually changing it in such a way that that problem is no longer one that people care about. And so it's hard to give an answer to this because this is where the skill of an entrepreneur really has to come in. But the ideas that will be the best are the ones which have the ability to survive as AI becomes more and more capable. And it's hard to know how capable the AI is going to become because we're on very clearly very steep exponential improvement in AI. So it's tough to think that far ahead. And it's almost like it's almost reduced to guessing at this point in terms of where we're going to be 2, 3 years from now. And obviously, any startup that's going to be viable has to last 5, 10 years. So I think that it is difficult to be an entrepreneur right now. But having said that, the opportunities have never been bigger. Now we have multiple trillion-dollar companies on the planet. We have got $100 billion companies all over the place. It used to be the case that I think 1% of startups would achieve, I think, 100 million in revenue in their life. And we've got companies, multiple companies that have achieved $100 billion in revenues in their first year. So the opportunity set is just massively different. And it's more difficult, I'll grant you that, but it's also the opportunity set is much larger.
Are you excited? Are you excited for what the future holds with this new technology, how our world can be shaped differently and how, massive problems such as healthcare and things can be better addressed with the adoption of new technologies? Like, what excites you the most?
I say to people that the 20-year period that started around 2022 and will go to about 2040 or so, that 20-year period, I think that even centuries from now, people are going to look back on that 20-year period as being the equivalent of the Renaissance in the way that we look back on it. Because I think we're going to have AI achieving extraordinary capabilities. Even today, it's already, I think, relatively extraordinary. It's amazing how much we are already taking for granted. What, 3 years ago, all of us were kind of just astonished by. And it's going to continue to improve. Then we're going to see quantum, which will come along, and that will open up a whole new era of innovation, especially when you couple quantum and AI together. And then towards the tail end of that time period, we'll see fusion, which will allow limitless amounts of energy. We don't know at what cost, but it'll certainly be unlimited in terms of its ability to be generated. And the three of these things together, I think, will put humanity in a very different place to where it was 20 years before. And the speed of that change is quite extraordinary. So I actually wish I was your age, frankly, because I think that this is the most exciting period. It's coming at the end of my career, but it's coming at the start of everyone's career who's on this call. So I think this is a very exciting time to be alive.
And I would agree. Look, I think, never before have we seen the ability to articulate our visions and our missions in such a clear and comprehensive way with the use of technology. And it just lowers that barrier for entry for everybody. And what I'm seeing is this seismic kind of shift in people adopting and taking risks to start their new companies. Whether those are going to be the next billion-dollar unicorns or not is yet to be seen. And there's a question there that says, it doesn't matter if you're not a billion-dollar unicorn. If you can make a sustainable business model, if you can leverage AI, if you can get, to your first revenue generation moment, leveraging these tools, then that's brilliant. And that's really exciting. And so I think, it's a really interesting time, and there's lots of negatives surrounding this, but there's also lots of positives. And as entrepreneurs, we like to look at the glass half full rather than the glass half empty. But I want to kind of question around regulation and what you're seeing in terms of this regulation in the landscape, and just ensuring that, that AI just isn't another massive marketing funnel. How do we all protect ourselves, and how can we train ourselves to really question the responses that we're getting from AI, and what the AI tools are delivering for us?
I think it's actually vital. And in fact, we actually would welcome regulation. This is a technology that will only be valuable if it has the trust of society. And you wouldn't go and inject yourself with some drug that hadn't gone through a process where a government body, which is independent, had approved it and tested it and made sure it was safe. In the same way, I think it's important that AI goes through its own equivalent processes of cross-checks to make sure that society believes that the providers of these technologies, which are very powerful, have done things in the right way and have got the appropriate controls and guardrails on it. The problem that we find right now, frankly, is that the regulators themselves are just not equipped to do this. That the bodies that are being formed, in many cases, the ability for those people to really keep up with what's going on or even understand what the current state of the art is limited. AI is new. There aren't that many people who know all about it in the first place. Many of the people who do know about it are working on it or trying to, as this group is trying to start companies around it. The number of people who are putting their hands up saying, I'm going to become an expert in AI and go and join the government is actually not that many. So it's difficult for governments to be able to put together the teams that actually have the ability to do this regulatory work, but it's absolutely vital. And we are helping as much as we can governments to develop their teams and not necessarily develop their policies or give them recommendations about that, but that would be, we don't want to be too self-serving, but just helping them to know what kind of teams they need to put up, because otherwise it's impossible. We want this, and they're not able to deliver it.
Bearing in mind the majority of our audience here tonight are students, a lot are coming from academia. What would your one piece of advice be to those students in today's world, knowing what you know, sitting where you sit? Do you have any salient advice for people?
I think you just have to be bold, because the world is changing very rapidly, and I think that what is clear is that the traditional career paths that were there and opportunities that I had when I was their age are going to be they may be there, but there's going to be so many more opportunities that will grow over time. And so being bold and being unafraid to not follow a traditional path, I think will ultimately pay off. Now, I'm not saying people should go and, do things which are completely irresponsible. But I think there is, I think it's not safe to go after safe things. I think it's actually more safe to go after things which are new. And let me put it like this. If you look at how GDP has evolved over time, uh, the compounding effect of general purpose technologies over the last 3 or 4 centuries has resulted in a really actually what is actually a geometric growth of GDP, such that actually if you normalize even for population growth, that this the last century versus the century before saw, I think, an 8x or I think a 5x to 8x improvement in GDP, which if you just pause on that for a second, even if it's 5x, what that means is that there's the economy that was a century before was 20% of the size of the prior one, which means that 80% of the economy in that next century was completely new. It didn't exist before. And if we were to, and by the way, this factor has been growing over time. It went from 1.2 to 1.5 to 2 to 4 to 8. So if you believe that's going to happen again, we don't have population growth anymore, but if you believe that's going to happen again, even at the level of what it happened before, or what happened before, which is 4 or 5x, let's say, all right, 5 to 8x, just take 5x. That means that the entire economy that we live in now is going to be 1/5 of the economy that will be there by the end of the century. So if you think about people who are students now in their 20s, by the time they reach their end of their careers, they'll be living in an economy which might have 2/3 of the economy is stuff that doesn't happen today.
And do you
So solving for what is there today, you're missing the bigger part of what's going to happen.
Absolutely. And do you think that there's going to be good distribution of kind of wealth across these economies? Or do you think that and do you think that really, organizations like Microsoft, like the Googles of the world, can help deliver that distribution of wealth through providing powerful tools to empower people? How do you see that in terms of a kind of a social responsibility angle for large organizations such as yourself?
So look, there are two aspects to that. One variant of the question is, are we going to see an era of giant companies and everybody else is crowded out? And I think the answer to that is absolutely no, because what you're seeing, for example, is that some of the more important companies in the world right now were not even there 5, 6 years ago. OpenAI, Anthropic, etc. Didn't exist, and now they are in many ways as important as the traditional 50-year-old company like Microsoft. And we're seeing startups that are coming out of nowhere, getting to enormous revenue growth, etc. So I think that again, back to my earlier comment, there's incredible opportunity to grow very, very large businesses if you pick your shots correctly. When it comes to the social aspect of it, in terms of concentration of wealth and distribution of wealth, look, I think that as wealth grows, there is at least more wealth to be moved around. So I think that with I dare say that even with the policies that exist today in the world, there should be an uplifting of everybody. Whether that results in some people becoming trillionaires or not, I mean, I'm not really equipped to comment on that. I don't know. But what I will say is that even the average person today lives like a king used to live, 200 years ago. And, an average person today lives like a very, very wealthy person, 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. The types of healthcare we have access to, the transportation, the entertainment options, etc. These are things that actually, were completely out of reach for most people in the world and are now taken for granted by everybody almost. So I think that it should lift all boats to the point where, think about it. We don't live in caves wearing animal skins. We've come a long way. And I think that journey will just continue.
And I agree that technology is a powerful enabler, and I'm really excited about the future. I'm conscious we've got so many brilliant questions in the chat, and I do want to make time to come to those. But before I move to those questions, is there anything else that you really wanted to share with our audience, things that you think might be helpful to our students today, anything about your journey that perhaps we haven't discussed yet?
I'd say that I'll go back to this comment of being bold. One of the things that happened when I was growing up in the UK was that, and what I noticed when I came to Silicon Valley was just the notion of what was possible was very different in Silicon Valley because any coffee shop or pub you'd go to, the talk was about starting companies and people who were starting companies or they knew someone had just started a company and done very well with it. So the art of what was possible was became very viscerally available because you could speak to someone who had done something. Whereas when I was in England, the art of the possible was much more around traditional career paths and doing certain things that had been done in that way for a long time, and finding people who were able to really have direct experience and say existence proof of doing something different was rare. What I've noticed is that the startup community in the UK is becoming much more vibrant. It's happened in the last 2, 3 years, and I've been looking at it for a long time. It's actually really vibrant right now. And I think people should just take inspiration from that. And obviously, if they're part of the eLab or part of the eLab community, they're clearly self-selected into that group of people. But I would just look for that inspiration, even, and if you don't find it locally, just look yeah, anywhere you can find it, because it is important to be able to relieve yourselves of any mental barriers that prevent you from thinking differently.
Great advice. And I do believe that there is a thriving ecosystem here in the UK. How do you see that differ over in the US?
It's mentality, largely speaking.
Mhm.
And it's a conversation I've had with everybody from government to investors to entrepreneurs to anyone in the UK. But it's mentality. It is changing. And that mentality changes when you have more people that you bump into that have had success. So success begets success. Cambridge itself has a very fertile ecosystem. Companies becoming increasingly successful, increasing numbers of them becoming successful. Used to be the case that people talked about ARM. ARM, obviously, now there are other companies that people talk about. So, no knock on ARM. It's an amazing company. It's a fantastic story, but it can't be the only story that people tell about Cambridge. And I think that there are new stories being born now at a faster pace, and that snowball effect is the key. And so I'm hoping that some of the people who are on the call today will be the next story that we'll all talk about.
Brilliant, wonderful. Okay, so to be bold and to be brave and to utilize the tools that you have available.
That's right.
Brilliant. I'm going to move just to start on our questions because we've got quite a
Yeah.
few good ones. So the first one through is here. It's from an anonymous attendee, but it says, as an early stage AI startup founder, how can I build a defensible product when the barriers to building with AI are so low?
Yeah, you have to pick a place where it isn't. The barriers aren't low, is what I could say. I think that it's difficult to give generic advice.
Mhm.
But what I would say is pick pick a product or a problem where the path to solving that problem relies on you doing something interesting in terms of an innovation. But if you're able to solve it and scale it, that by doing so, you've hidden behind a moat that is not going to be changed by AI. So think hard about what are the things that AI will be able to do, and make sure that your moat is not one of those things. So, I mean, with the generic nature of the question, it's hard for me to know what exactly this person's doing. But if it's something around, I'm just going to be doing something useful for coding, I'd say you got challenges because these things are getting even better every day at coding. If it's something where it requires empowerment of a person and there's some empathy or some trust or some humanity in the way that it's delivered, then if you're successful, then that is probably something which still the customers will want to have. So I just think hard about the moat that you're ultimately going to build around, and be ruthless about saying whether AI can actually replace it. Even today, you can see elements of where AI is improving and where, frankly, it's not going to get there. That's where you have to have some discernment.
And in those areas where you think it's not going to get there, what kind of broadly are you seeing in the market at the minute?
Well, I think the generic ones right now are around uh, network effects, brand, customer relationships, the ability to access dynamic data sources. These are things which ultimately be difficult for an AI to ultimately get a hold of. But there may be more as we see. how these models evolve, where we say, also the way that people react to the models and behave and interact with models will also be quite telling in terms of where people are willing to use them and where they're not. So I think it's important to kind of be clear-sighted about that because these models are not going to be replacements for us. They're going to augment, which means augmentation means they do some things really well, but other things they rely on us to do.
And then I've got a brilliant question here from Noah. He says, do you think there's an AI bubble? And if yes, when do you think it will burst?
Well, this is a very expected question. It's the question I was asking. Um, so, in terms of a bubble, it's where valuations are unsupported by future cash flows. And if you look at large companies, most large companies, not all but most, are funding their activities through organic cash flow generation. So there's no one who's very few of the large companies are going out there and raising a bunch of debt or spending money that they don't have. So, is there a bubble? I mean, the point is that those companies are not behaving in ways which are irresponsible. And that, by the way, there was irresponsible behavior in other past bubbles where people were, making very speculative bets and taking out, making bets which are larger than they could afford. In the private market, I think there's a lot more um, difficulty in projecting the certainty of companies' future. And so you see companies there that are either taking on debt or raising a lot of investor capital to make business plans that rely on pretty enormous improvements in the business performance for them to be able to justify it. And I dare say a lot of that will not pay out. But so I think whether you call that a bubble or whether you say that's just um, you know, animal spirits of investors who are keen to make sure that they don't miss out. I think it's in the end you do end up with this sort of creative kind of capital allocation that occurs at the start of these things, where inevitably a lot of it will be destroyed. But out of that remnants, you do get the incredibly large companies that come, and it's natural that investors will want to take the risk because they don't want to be missing out, even though most of them are not going to succeed.
Absolutely. And I kind of like this next question. It's a bit of a deviation away from an AI bubble, and it's more generic in terms of entrepreneurship. But I think it's important because the question here is looking back, what's the most valuable lessons you've learned from a mistake? One that many entrepreneurs may benefit from too.
Well, I think that the biggest mistake that I've always made, or the biggest mistake I've made it two or three times, is to actually not bet on the upside.
Mhm.
And so it's what has happened a couple of times in my personal journey is that I was cautious about whether or not I would succeed. And it's not that I've always been successful, I've often failed. But what was the worst was to have succeeded, but then not have planned for the success. And that I think was really something that has happened a couple of times. So I would just say it's important to bet on yourself because the upside is worth a lot more than the potential downside.
Makes sense. And they say that in tough times you learn the most. And life's just a long journey, right?
Yeah, I'd say you learn the most in both times, actually. You learn the most, I'd say you learn the most in both extremes. You learn the most in the tough times, and you learn a lot also when things go really well. Funny enough, I actually find that people's personalities are a lot more revealed when things go really well, more than when things go bad, actually, funny enough. But the thing which is bad is when things go really well and you didn't plan for that, and so you end up with haven't got the right outcome for yourself or haven't actually got the right next step planned. That's when you really kind of kick yourself saying, why did I do that?
I mean, I want to ask you, Bobby, what you do when things go really well, but we'll move on to our next question that says it's about the development of AI between China and the US. And the questions here is saying, what do you think students who are interested in working on AI after graduation, if they're interested in entrepreneurship, should they consider doing work placements? I think this more broadly speaks to, where should you go and work as well? We've got a global access now to the world. if they're interested in AI development, where do you see the place to be?
Oh, I think that's I would say wherever you can, frankly, because it's just important to get experience wherever it is. Um, the existence proof is that no frontier model has been created outside of the city of San Francisco. Right? Every other model that's been created is some derivative of a frontier model, but no frontier model has been created outside that city. So you could say, well, I need to go to San Francisco because that's where it's at. Yeah, if you happen to be one of the very, very few people in the world that get to work on frontier models, great, you should do that. But those are extremely selective people that, I don't necessarily think it's prudent to bank on that being you, unless you happen to be, in that cadre, which is very, very select. Um, San Francisco is buzzing with a lot of AI startups, that's for sure. So is New York, so is London, so are major cities in Europe, so is in India, same thing in the Middle East. It's happening all over China. I mean, this is not a phenomenon that is um, isolated to one place. So I would say wherever you can, I don't think that I wouldn't focus too much on geography. Just get in where you can.
And I guess to your earlier story and your own personal experience, you've traveled a lot, you've worked in different places. So regardless, I guess, of the industry that you're working in, what has that global perspective brought you to your work, the understanding of different cultures and working across different geographies?
It's been essential, actually. So I think it's important to be able to get that. I just to link it to the prior question. I think when people are saying where should they get experience, I say just get experience where you can. But that's again back to this notion of the path being not linear. Global experience, working with people from around the world, working in different cultures, having the ability to expose yourself to how other people think about what is, what a good life should be led. That's another kind of building block to people's experience. Sometimes it could be done contemporaneously with getting work experience. Sometimes it can be through other activities, and it's not necessarily the case that that needs to be done first or second or third. It can be done at some point in your life. I would say probably better to be done sooner rather than later because it's a foundational element. But again, I wouldn't solve too narrowly saying I need to be, if I want to do AI, I have to be in California or I have to be in China. I wouldn't solve that narrowly. I would just say, go get experience in AI at some point, go get experience internationally as well.
Makes perfect sense. And I feel like I'm just rattling through the questions, but we've got so many good ones. And our next question I love, and I think it's really important that we touch on this. And the question is from an anonymous attendee, but it's when we're focused on building the next unicorn or startup, how do we still take responsibility for the people affected by what we create, especially with AI risks around inequality, isolation, and mental health?
Well, I think it's absolutely a critical question. I'm so glad that someone asked this. We spend a lot of time on this ourselves. And I think it's incumbent on anybody who's in the AI sphere to be thinking about that. And so we have a process which is the multiple stage gated process for any product release, where there's an independent group of people, which is our safety body, essentially, our responsible AI team. And every product that goes out the door has to go through this multiple stage gate review with our responsible AI team at all stages of development until it's released, and then even after it's released, to check how it's actually performing to make sure that we are within our bounds of acceptable behavior around the way that it is processing information, the way it's delivering information, the way that it's actually dealing with customer information, the way it deals with people who are using it and their mental health. So we use that process at the core of our product development. It's not an adjunct to it; it's the core of our product development. And in our consumer products, we put personality and empathy at the heart of our products, which we think is one of our differentiators. So we do that, and I would hope that everybody does that, because no matter what it is you're doing, you have to understand that it's being used by a person at the other end, and these are powerful tools. And so powerful tools require responsibility, and I'm very glad someone has asked the question. I hope that everybody thinks about it as they do their startups.
And it's great to hear that the big tech giants are obviously thinking about this, and so they should. But what on a practical level, What sort of advice might you have for people to just protect themselves as well from the tools? I think there's, we always look for onus on the big tech companies, but also how can you empower and how can we empower ourselves to stay sane in this highly technologically enabled and advancing world?
I think the most important thing right now is around verifiable information
Mm.
because it's so easy for videos, audio, certainly text, images to be generated that look credible but are just not. And so, we've got an initiative where we're able to, with a lot of the media companies, introduce a blue dot in the corner of an image, and that there's a blue dot there. That means it's actually a real thing, and it's been generated by a real organization as opposed to AI. That's getting some traction in major media outlets. But there are so many other outlets that we are not intercepting or won't be able to intercept. So I think one of the most important things is just for people to develop um, their own sense of just making sure people are aware and are questioning all the time. Is what I'm seeing actually real? Because it is that I think for me is the most important thing that we have to watch out for. People getting hoodwinked or getting led down a rabbit hole because of something which is generated by a bot. And there's so much slop out there, but the slop is getting to be high quality, and we have to be careful that people aren't being fooled. So I think having a heightened sense of awareness and discrimination is actually really critical.
I love that. I think that's really salient advice, just to be aware and to use your own critical judgment and analysis with everything that you see and just not take things as verbatim of
That's
truth.
right.
Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely. Um, there's a question here from Jamie, and he says, "Hi, Bobby. You mentioned it is important that AI is a great tool to augment the core of the business. Could you give an example that you may have seen or you personally use in your team or at Microsoft?"
Well, I think there's lots of examples of this, but one of the good ones is obviously around uh, life sciences. So in life sciences, as people develop drugs, clearly there's some great work that's been done by various people in the industry, including Google, including us, around protein folding and developing new molecules and being able to decide whether they're synthesized. That's fantastic work, and it's helpful at the outset of a drug development process. But the drug development process actually, the vast majority of the cost is not at that part. It's when you go through clinical trials and you're applying for approval with the FDA, etc. And one of the things that actually many drug companies are really good at is making submissions to the FDA for drug candidates to be approved, which is a laborious process, requires some skill in terms of how things are written and how trials are executed. And now we have companies which, instead of taking months of very laborious work to do that, are able to do it in weeks or days using AI, which is actually a great way for them to be able to accelerate the part of the process where you kind of have something which is already on the point of being useful to humans, but is kind of has to go through this process. Equally, the regulatory bodies on their side are using AI to look at them as well, which also speeds up things on their side so they know the critical questions they have to ask. And so the interaction becomes a lot smoother. That's fantastic because what that's doing is it's leveraging the expertise that the pharma company has. It also leverages the expertise that the regulatory bodies have, augmenting it using AI to make sure these processes can occur more efficiently and quickly, and really cutting down the time to get things which are no longer at the experimental stage, but actually at the point where it's actually we know this stuff works and just need to get it into people. So I think that's one of my favorite examples.
I think that's a really powerful example. So more innovation, more speed, more outcomes with AI. Oh, we've got, of course, we can't have an AI question, AI chat without some sort of existential question. I'm going to rephrase the question slightly, but what do you believe are kind of the existential threats with AI? I think people are still hesitant and nervous around AI and the power of it.
Yeah.
Should people be
So,
concerned?
I'd say concerned about things like misinformation and disinformation.
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. Concerned about runaway AGI? No. First of all, I don't really subscribe to the notion of AGI. I don't really know what the definition is that makes much sense. And frankly, I think it's a little bit of a waste of time to discuss it
Mhm.
because the thing that I'm more interested in is AI as a tool that can help productivity. So as long as we have useful AI that's improving productivity, then that to me is the goal. AGI is a fuzzy buzzword that I don't really know what it means or why people would even spend time thinking about it. What I think people are concerned about is this notion that you have runaway AI that can take over the world. And what I would say is that if you think about what is necessary for AI to be able to do things, which are those sorts of runaway cases, you have to also think about the ability for an AI then to be able to automatically do physical activities like building a data center, building a chip fab, churning out chips, creating a power plant, connecting the power plant up, making sure that you have devices that are built that can use this AI and go around the world. And that physical activity and the supply chains required there it's pretty complicated, and I think we're very, very far from AI or robots being able to do that type of thing at scale in a way that's runaway. So I'm not really sure that's likely. I also think these ideas that somehow someone's going to invent a model that's going to somehow corner the entire stock market and cream off all value added to I think that's also pretty unlikely to be the case. So I think these runaway ideas are less um, I find them to be less credible. I think the things which should worry people more are, are people going to be uh, taken advantage of in terms of their ability to discriminate between misinformation, disinformation, and real information? And is AI going to be falling into the hands of bad actors who will use it in such a way that it could cause, security scams, cybersecurity activity, etc.? Those things I think are real concerns, which we have efforts underway to counteract those. But those I think are the level of concern that are the things around which I have concern. You know, AGI and runaway AI is not one of them.
This makes a lot of sense. And so, look, I personally have children, and I'm sure many people listening do as well. And just how important to you then is it that we really teach our children and we teach our young minds how to think and how to think critically and just constantly come back to that and ensure that our education systems are also equipped with this level of discernment.
I think that one of the things that's important is that as AI gets better, I think we as humans have an incumbent responsibility to understand what we are particularly good at and get better at that as well. In some ways, AI helps us to understand what makes us human and to be better at that. And I think critical thinking, discrimination, empathy, the ability to build, communities, these are things which we're really quite good at as a species. And I think we just need to get better at that. And so children, younger people, etc., just need to have the ability to emphasize those kinds of capabilities.
Well, I absolutely love that because I think for me, what you're talking to there is authenticity. And, I coach and work with a lot of founders. And I think in a world where information is everywhere, it's not really the lack of information that's the challenge. It's this, the fact that there is too much information almost, and it crowds our minds. And we don't often give ourselves the space and time to critically think and ask ourselves, what am I truly good at? What is authentically me? What could I do all day long? And I just love the fact that you brought that up there because this idea of authenticity and then the application of AI as a tool to enhance your passions and to enhance that what you're really good at, I think something really, really powerful and something we just need to keep reminding ourselves of.
Yeah, I like the way that you phrase it actually in the end, Francesca, because I think that at some level, if there's anything that's going to come of this era of AI, it is that we learn what we're truly good at and authentically good at, and businesses that are started actually learn what they're truly good at, and ultimately that will be the way that society will move forward.
And so I've got a few more questions, but you're so popular with getting through there. This one from John, we've touched on this concept of the AI bubble before, but there's a secondary point here around this idea that perhaps there may be a big correction in the implementation of AI tools. Do you see that being a thing that potentially businesses need to be aware of? Is that we put all this energy and effort into implementing the tools and then suddenly we have to revert that? Or do you feel like it's less sort of, I guess, linear than that?
What's interesting for me is that at the same time as people ask these questions, people also ask the questions around, is this stuff useful enough, but people aren't adopting it, the business is not growing quickly enough to justify the expenditure. So I think we can't have it both ways, right? This is not so, it's not yet so powerful that we feel like we've completely corrupted society. And also, it's more powerful than people think it is because people are actually adopting it quite well. So we're sort of in, we're well towards the left-hand end of that in terms of it's not something that's close to being as dangerous as people are portraying. Now, I can understand with exponential curves, people saying, well, it's going to become like that. But again, I draw you back to the prior comment that I made, which is that runaway activity is the thing which people worry about the most. And again, just we have to think hard about what is the overall system that needs to be put in place for runaway activity to take place. And I've never heard anyone describe to me runaway scenario that doesn't go through an execution path involving physical activities and human decision making.
Thank you. And I'm conscious of time because I know that we've got a hard stop. So I think maybe I'll just do one more question before we look to wrap things up. This has been incredibly insightful. I've got a question here from Yasmin that says, what is the new role of senior and middle managers in the era of AI, especially in terms of formulating strategy, directions of growth, and strategic execution?
It's a great question. I love this question. And the answer is actually, I don't know. But
Mhm.
I'll tell you a couple of things. First of all, what we found empirically is that when AI is introduced into organizations, that every organization has a bell curve of performance. Most people are average, some people are great, some people are not so great. What we find is that the left-hand side of that curve goes away. Everyone who's actually less than average suddenly becomes at least average. And the people who are at the very right-hand end of the curve extends all the way out. They become really great.
Mhm.
The second thing we find is that so first of all, any that has two implications. One is that obviously performance can go up, but secondly, it reduces the barrier of capability you need before you can do a role. So even if you're not a great coder, you can actually create an app, right? Even if you're not a great marketer, you could create an ad. Now they may not be good, but you can do it, whereas previously you couldn't even approach it. So this idea of generalization of capability becomes important, even for junior people. The second thing is that over time, what's going to happen is we're going to move to a world where even junior people are going to become managers. They'll be managers of AI bots. AI agents will be working for them. You might have 4 or 5 AI agents working for you. So the idea of what's a manager versus what's a junior person kind of gets very blurry. And what we're seeing right now is, the classic pyramid structure of organizations is now being called into question. Some people are saying, oh, we still need a pyramid, but it needs to be a slightly different shape of pyramid. Some people are saying, no, actually, we need more of a cylinder structure. Some people are saying, no, we need a diamond structure, right? You need a lot more. So I'm seeing it right now. Companies are experimenting with all of this. So I actually don't know what is the answer. But what I would say is that everyone, especially younger people, need to get good at managing techniques because you're going to be managing something very quickly, even if it's not another person.
I think that's a perfect way to conclude our session. How quickly an hour goes. Bobby, I wanted to ask you if we were in person, we would always ask for book recommendations and give out books to the best questions. Do you have a book recommendation for us this evening?
Well, I'll just recommend Mustafa's book, The Coming Wave, because I think he's an extremely insightful and broad thinker, and I think he wrote a great book. So, and I'll tell him he owes me one because I've got a bunch of people to buy his book. So, so why don't we go with that one?
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for giving up your time to be with us today. It's been an absolute privilege to be in conversation with you. And thank you to all of our participants for tuning in and listening. Next week, we will be back in person at King's, where we'll be speaking to the CEO of Pinterest, Bill Reddy. And that will conclude our speaker series for the Michaelmas term. But we hope, Bobby, that you can join us in person at King's when you're next in the UK. It would be an absolute privilege to host you.
I'll look forward to that. And thanks for being a great moderator as well, Francesca.
All right. Thanks, Bobby.
Bye bye.
Thanks, everybody, for joining.